Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a story that's absolutely wild. A journey through time that unearths heroes, villains, and even royalty in one man's family tree. We're talking about British pop icon Will Young, who most of you probably know as a singer. He shot to fame as the winner of Pop Idol 2002, and let me tell you, instant success like that was pretty rare back then. His first gig? Wembley Stadium. That's just bonkers, right? But beyond the sold-out shows and hit albums, Will also became a successful actor of stage and screen. He actually wanted to act before he wanted to sing, and he loves how acting lets him get all these emotions out and feel so alive. Now imagine going from making pop videos to thinking about your ancestors while dancing around. That's exactly where Will found himself as he embarked on a quest to uncover his family's past. He admitted he knew nothing and was desperate to be a Viking. Little did he know, he'd find much more than just Vikings. The mystery of Digby Young, a grandfather unveiled. Will grew up in Hungerford, Berkshire, with his mother Annabelle, father Robin, older sister Emma, and twin brother Robert. While he was familiar with his maternal grandparents, Mimi and Bobby, he never knew his father's grandfather, Digby Young. Digby died quite young, at age 50. And Will only knew that he was Australian and was supposedly imprisoned during the war. This lack of knowledge made him incredibly excited to investigate. His journey started by visiting his Aunt Wiggy, his father's sister, who was a fountain of all knowledge on family history. Wiggy confirmed that Will's grandfather was indeed Digby. Digby was described as charming and was born in Australia. He came to England, sponsored by an aunt, to train to be a doctor. He attended University College, Oxford, and when war broke out, joined the RAF. Wiggy also confirmed that Digby was shot down and a prisoner of war for 5 years, specifically in the Stalag Luft camp where the Great Escape happened. This was a massive revelation for Will, who only knew he was in a POW camp, not for the entire war. At Oxford, Will met historian Simon Slight, who revealed more details about Digby. Digby was born on February 2, 1916, at Rose Park, a suburb in Adelaide, Australia. The reason his family was in Australia? They were colonial administrators. His 3 times great-grandfather, Sir Henry Edward Fox Young, was governor of the colony of South Australia in the 1840s and early 1850s, and then governor of Tasmania. So they were elite members of colonial society. Digby studied physiology at University College, Oxford. Interestingly, he received a 4th-class degree, sometimes called a sporting 4th. This was because he was exceptionally good at swimming. A newspaper article from 1937 reported him as one of the fastest sprinters in England. Apparently, he spent somewhat too long in the pool and not enough time in the library. After Oxford, he continued his medical training at St. Mary's in London. But his studies were interrupted. Digby joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve in 1937, while still at university. Then, a month before World War II, in 1939, he joined the RAF full-time at just 23 years old. This was a daring move for a young man. A Pilot's War, Missions and Capture. To learn more about Digby's time as a pilot, Will visited the RAF Museum, meeting aviation historian Victoria Taylor. She showed him a Handley Page Hampton bomber, the exact type of plane his grandfather flew. Nicknamed the Flying Suitcase due to its unusual shape, this bomber typically had a crew of 4: pilot, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, and rear gunner. Will was shown war diaries of 61 Squadron where Digby served. These records detailed his dangerous missions. In October 1940, Digby participated in the first British attack on Berlin, targeting Tempelhof Aerodrome. This was the nerve center of German aviation and a heavily defended target. Another mission saw him attack an oil refinery, diverting to another aerodrome when he couldn't find the primary target. The records noted Digby as one of the squadron's most experienced pilots. Then came the chilling realization: Digby's plane was struck. He was deployed against Berlin and suffered engine failure on the return flight. As the crew believed they couldn't reach home, they prepared to bail out. At that moment, flak fragments hit the machine. In an incredible testament to his flying skills, Digby and his entire crew parachuted out unharmed and immediately surrendered. This was not a given. Getting out safely with a parachute from a failing plane was incredibly difficult and terrifying. Life as a POW and the gruesome march. Digby was transferred to 8 different camps during the war, but spent the most time at Stalag Luft 3 from 1943 to 1945. This was a camp for Bomber Command airmen. Will visited the remains of the camp in Poland, walking the same paths his grandfather would have. Digby lived in Barracks 64 and shared a room with at least 9 other POWs. Conditions were harsh, with constant fuel shortages, forcing prisoners to sleep in all their clothes during winter. At Stalag Luft 3, officers like Digby didn't have to work, making boredom a significant challenge. However, they could write letters through the Red Cross, which also supplied sports equipment. Digby, being very sporting, would have appreciated this. Here's where Digby's medical training became crucial. Historian M.I.J. Gillies revealed that Digby was considered an authority due to his knowledge of medicine. He was very much in demand when the annual Repatriation Commission visited a camp. Digby would help fellow prisoners describe symptoms of some suitably chronic disease that qualified for repatriation, like faking TB symptoms. This allowed prisoners to push back against what you were suffering. The end of the war brought another terrifying ordeal. In January 1945, as the Russian guns boomed from the east and the Allies approached from the west, Hitler commanded that the POWs be marched towards Berlin. This was effectively to use them as human shields. In temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius, Digby and his fellow prisoners faced a dangerous journey. They suffered from frostbite and dysentery, leaving tracks of blood behind the people as they marched. It was hell on earth. And here's a truly extraordinary and harrowing detail. During this forced march, one German guard was near death from frostbite and gangrene. His only hope was an amputation. Digby Young, with only some alcohol and a few kitchen knives, performed the operation. He had to rely on his student medical training. He saved the man's life. What an incredible act of principle and courage, operating on one of his captors under such brutal conditions. From POW to squadron leader, a remarkable career. After this horrific march, Digby ended up in another camp, Stalag 3A. Conditions there were really appalling, with grim sanitation and very little food. When the German guards melted away, they were replaced by Russians, and the Allied POWs were still held. Digby, with a friend, decided they had to escape. They managed to get 2 passes from a cultured Russian officer who spoke fluent French and liked his liquor, in exchange for Digby's Rolex watch and the officer's biggest hangover of all time. They then pedaled off into the unknown on bicycles. They eventually reached American forces and were flown back to the UK. What happened next is truly astonishing. Straight after the war, Digby had a really interesting career. He became an advanced flying school instructor and rose to the rank of squadron leader. He went on to fly jets, which was incredibly impressive, given the progression from the bombers he flew during the war. He stayed in the RAF until 1958. Will was amazed, realizing Digby liked the adventure and found his vocation. This transformed Will's perception of his grandfather. He now felt he had another grandfather, no longer just a sad picture of an early death, but such a dude. Will even got a tattoo of Digby's plane and squadron number, next to his Young family motto, "Sewer without fear." Beyond the war, noble lineage, and a notorious ancestor. Will then pushed further back, exploring the Young family line. He learned that his 4 times great-grandfather, Sir Aryetis William Young, whose portrait he had seen, was a colonial governor in Canada, specifically Prince Edward Island. But then came a deeply troubling revelation. Sir Aryetis started his career in Ireland, serving in places like Gibraltar, Sicily, and Egypt. Then he took on a role in Demerara called the Protector of Slaves. The intention was to look out for enslaved people's interests. However, an anti-slavery monthly reporter in November 1829 published a damning critique.
It stated that Colonel Young showed himself to be as deeply imbued with some of the worst of those colonial prejudices as the planters themselves, causing unspeakably great disappointment. Yes, he got fired from that job, which is how he ended up in Canada. Will was glad he got fired. The journey continued, taking Will all the way back to his 18 times great-grandparents, Hugh Lee Despencer and Helena de Clare, from the 14th century during the reign of Edward II. Will visited Goodrich Castle, briefly owned by Hugh. Meeting medieval historian Chris Given Wilson, Will learned about Hugh Lee Despencer, one of the most important and controversial political figures of the 14th century. The Despensers were powerful lords with ambitions to reach the top tier of English nobility. Hugh was a great accumulator of land, mostly by nefarious means.
For example, he manipulated Elizabeth Comyn to unwillingly give him Goodrich Castle. In 1318, Hugh became the king's chamberlain, controlling access to Edward II and exploiting his power. Chroniclers described him as full of evil and wrongdoing, greedy and covetous, feared and hated by all. He was a royal favorite, and some even suggested Edward II had a homosexual relationship with his favorites, which allowed Hugh to get away with a tremendous amount. Hugh was very widely hated, so much so that in 1321 the king was forced to send him and his father into exile. But Hugh wasn't idle. He remained at sea, master of the seas, and became, in essence, a pirate. He attacked ships, killed crews, and seized goods worth thousands of pounds, a massive sum at the time. He's even considered one of the great criminals of English history. 4 months later, Edward II recalled the Despensers and launched a war against his enemies, known as the Despenser War. They were completely victorious, with many lords executed, including Edward's cousin Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, who was beheaded. But Hugh's reign of terror wouldn't last. Queen Isabella, Edward II's wife, hated Hugh. She raised an army and invaded England. Edward II and Hugh le Despencer fled, but were captured. Prepare yourselves for this next part, because it's pretty gruesome. Hugh le Despencer faced one of the most prolonged and painful deaths imaginable. On November 24, 1926, in Hereford Castle, he was stripped, dragged through the streets behind horses, then hanged. While still alive on a 50-foot ladder, he was castrated, his genitals thrown into the fire. Then, his stomach was slit open, his entrails pulled out and also thrown into the fire. Finally, he was beheaded, his body cut into quarters and distributed around the country. Will's reaction? No one deserves it, but possibly, if anyone does, he was a very bad man. Despite his horrific end, Hugh Despencer's powerful wife, Helena de Clare, secured permission to establish a monument for him in Tewkesbury Abbey. This tomb, along with a stained glass depiction in the abbey, shows the immense sway and clout her family had, essentially erasing history in a way, as Will put it. The royal twist. King Edward I. And just when Will thought he couldn't be more shocked, the genealogist revealed one last jaw-dropping connection. Through Helena de Clare's parents, Gilbert de Clare and Joan of Acre, Will is directly descended from royalty. King Edward I is Will's 20 times great-grandfather. Will's reaction was pure disbelief. No, you're joking, you've made it up. But it was true. This entire experience, as Will described it, was one of the most eye-opening, rewarding, fulfilling, soul-nourishing experiences he's ever had. He started with a vague idea of a sad grandfather and discovered a dude who was a brave pilot, a resilient POW, and a skilled medic who saved a life under impossible circumstances. And then he found himself connected to a notorious monster of a man, Hugh le Despencer, and ultimately to King Edward I. Talk about a family tree. What an incredible journey of discovery. It just goes to show you never know what stories are hidden in your own family's past. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more amazing stories, and let us know in the comments, what surprising facts have you uncovered about your family history? We'll see you next time.